The opulent halls of Goldcrest Industries echoed with the sound of expensive leather shoes striking marble floors. Richard Goldcrest, CEO and heir to the Goldcrest fortune, strode purposefully through the corridors, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the simple attire of those who scurried out of his way. His steel-gray eyes, cold as the New York winter beyond the windows, swept over his employees with barely concealed disdain. As he approached his office, a small figure caught his attention. Sarah Thompson, his personal assistant, stood by her desk, a stack of papers clutched to her chest. Her mousy brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her thrift store blazer hung loosely on her slight frame. "Thompson!" Richard barked, causing Sarah to flinch. "Where are the quarterly reports I asked for?" Sarah's eyes widened as she fumbled with the papers. "Mr. Goldcrest, I'm so sorry. I was just about to bring them to you. There was a small delay in..." "A delay?" Richard's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize the world stopped turning just because you couldn't manage your time properly." He snatched the papers from her hands, scattering a few across the floor. "Pick those up and get back to work. And Thompson? If you can't handle the simplest tasks, perhaps it's time we found someone more competent." Sarah knelt to gather the fallen papers, her cheeks burning with humiliation as other employees pretended not to notice. As she reached for the last sheet, a weathered hand beat her to it. She looked up to see the kind eyes of Harold Jenkins, the elderly janitor, who had worked at Goldcrest Industries longer than anyone could remember. "Don't let him get to you, Miss Sarah," Harold whispered, handing her the paper. "Some people, they got all the money in the world, but their hearts are as empty as a beggar's bowl." Sarah managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Harold. I need this job. My sister's medical bills." Harold nodded sympathetically. "The good Lord sees all, Miss Sarah. You keep your chin up. Your day will come." As Sarah returned to her desk, she couldn't help but wonder if Harold was right. Would her day ever come? Or was she destined to remain in the shadows, enduring the cruel whims of men like Richard Goldcrest? Little did Sarah know that fate had set in motion a series of events that would shake the very foundations of Goldcrest Industries and her own life to the core. 3 months earlier, in a small town on the outskirts of Boston. The rain fell in heavy sheets, matching the tears that streamed down Sarah's face as she stood before her childhood home. The for sale sign swayed in the wind, a stark reminder of how quickly life could change. "Sarah, honey, it's time to go," her mother, Eleanor, called softly from the car. "We can't keep the movers waiting." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. This house held so many memories: her father's booming laugh, the smell of her mother's apple pie, the sound of her sister Emily's piano playing drifting through the halls. But now, with her father gone and Emily's mounting medical bills, they had no choice but to sell. As she turned to leave, a glint of metal caught her eye. There, half buried in the flower bed her father had so lovingly tended, was a small key. Sarah knelt, unmindful of the mud staining her jeans, and carefully unearthed it. "What's that, sweetie?" Eleanor asked as Sarah climbed into the car. Sarah turned the key over in her palm. "I'm not sure, Mom. It was in Dad's garden." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "I've never seen that before. Your father, he always did love his little mysteries." As they drove away, leaving behind the only home Sarah had ever known, she couldn't shake the feeling that this key was more than just a forgotten trinket. It was as if her father, even from beyond the grave, was trying to tell her something. New York City, present day. Sarah's tiny apartment was a far cry from the spacious home she'd grown up in, but it was all she could afford on her meager salary. She sat at her small kitchen table, sipping instant coffee and poring over Emily's latest medical bills. There has to be a way, she muttered, running her fingers through her hair in frustration. The experimental treatment Emily needed was their last hope, but the cost was astronomical. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Sarah?" "It's me. Open up." Sarah smiled despite her worries. "Coming, Mia." She opened the door to reveal her best friend and neighbor, Mia Rodriguez. Mia's vibrant personality was reflected in her colorful clothing and the way her dark curls bounced as she moved. "Chica, you look like you haven't slept in days," Mia said, pushing past Sarah and into the apartment. "Let me guess, you're still trying to figure out how to pay for Emily's treatment?" Sarah nodded, slumping back into her chair. "I don't know what to do, Mia. I've taken on extra shifts, I've cut every expense I can, but it's still not enough." Mia's eyes softened. "Have you considered asking for a raise? You work harder than anyone at that company." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Ask Richard Goldcrest for a raise? I might as well ask him to donate his entire fortune to charity. You know what he's like, Mia. To him, I'm less than nothing." Mia's eyes flashed with anger. "That man is a monster, Sarah. The way he treats you, the way he treats everyone, it's not right." "I know," Sarah sighed. "But what can I do? Jobs aren't exactly easy to come by these days, and I can't risk losing this one. Emily's depending on me." Mia opened her mouth to respond when Sarah's phone buzzed. Sarah glanced at the screen and groaned. "Speaking of the devil, it's Mr. Goldcrest. He wants me to come in early tomorrow to prepare for some big meeting." "On a Saturday?" Mia exclaimed. "That's it, Sarah. You need to stand up to him." Sarah shook her head. "I can't, Mia. I can't." As Sarah began gathering her things for the next day, her eyes fell on the small box where she kept her father's mysterious key. For a moment, she was tempted to open it, to seek some kind of guidance from the father she'd lost. But what good would it do? No key could unlock the solution to her problems. Little did Sarah know that the key she dismissed so easily held secrets that would soon turn her world, and the world of Richard Goldcrest, upside down. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Goldcrest Industries an hour before sunrise. The towering glass and steel structure loomed over her, its windows dark save for the top floor where Richard Goldcrest's office overlooked the city. As she made her way through the empty lobby, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her stomach. Something about today felt different, charged with an energy she couldn't quite explain. The elevator doors opened on the top floor, and Sarah stepped out, her arms laden with files and her laptop bag slung over her shoulder. She was so focused on not dropping anything that she almost ran straight into a tall figure standing in the shadows. "Mr. Goldcrest," she gasped, stumbling backward. "I'm so sorry, I didn't see you there." Richard Goldcrest emerged from the darkness, his expression unreadable. "Clearly," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I suppose I should be grateful you managed to arrive on time for once." Sarah bit back a retort. She had never once been late, but arguing would only make things worse. "I have the files you requested for the meeting, sir. Would you like me to go over them with you?" Richard waved a hand dismissively. "I'm sure I can manage to read them myself, Thompson. Though given your usual level of competence, I should probably double-check everything." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Of course, sir. Is there anything else you need me to do?" Richard's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Sarah thought she saw something flicker behind them, fear? But it was gone so quickly she was sure she must have imagined it. "Yes," he said slowly. "I need you to go down to the archives and retrieve a file for me. It's an old project of my father's. Project Lazarus. Sarah frowned. In all her years at Goldcrest Industries, she had never heard of such a project. I'm not familiar with that one, sir. Do you know where in the archives it might be? Richard's jaw tightened. If I knew that, I wouldn't be sending you to find it, would I? Just go and don't come back until you have it. As Sarah turned to leave, Richard called out, and Thompson? This stays between us. No one else needs to know about this project. Understood? Sarah nodded, her mind racing. What could be so important about this mysterious Project Lazarus? And why did Richard Goldcrest, a man who usually exuded nothing but arrogant confidence, suddenly seem so afraid? As the elevator doors closed behind her, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to stumble upon something much bigger than a simple corporate file. Little did she know that her search would uncover secrets that had been buried for decades, secrets that would shake Goldcrest Industries to its very core and change her life forever. The archives of Goldcrest Industries were housed in the basement, a vast labyrinth of filing cabinets and storage boxes that stretched as far as the eye could see. As Sarah made her way through the dimly lit rows, the musty smell of old paper filled her nostrils. Project Lazarus, she muttered to herself, running her fingers along the labels of dusty file boxes. Where are you? Hours passed, and Sarah's frustration grew. She had searched every section, every cabinet, but there was no sign of anything related to Project Lazarus. As she slumped against a filing cabinet, ready to admit defeat, her elbow bumped against a small lever hidden in the metalwork. There was a soft click, and to Sarah's astonishment, a section of the wall swung open, revealing a hidden room. Heart pounding, Sarah stepped inside. The room was small, containing only a single filing cabinet and an ancient computer terminal. On top of the cabinet sat a small lockbox, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. With trembling hands, Sarah approached the lockbox. There, etched into the metal, were two words that made her breath catch in her throat. Project Lazarus. Sarah reached for the box, but stopped short. It was locked, the keyhole small and intricate. As she stared at it, a memory flashed through her mind, the key she had found in her father's garden, the one she had dismissed as unimportant. Could it be? Before she could pursue that thought, the sound of footsteps echoed from the archives. Sarah's heart leapt into her throat as she recognized the purposeful stride of Richard Goldcrest. In a panic, she grabbed the lockbox and shoved it into her bag. She had just managed to slip out of the hidden room and close the secret door when Richard rounded the corner. Thompson, he barked. What are you doing down here? I told you to find that file hours ago. Sarah swallowed hard, her bag feeling impossibly heavy with its illicit contents. I'm sorry, Mr. Goldcrest. I've searched everywhere, but I can't find any record of Project Lazarus. Richard's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Is that so? Well, I suppose it was a long shot anyway. Forget about it. Get back upstairs and prepare for the board meeting. As Sarah hurried past him, she could feel Richard's eyes boring into her back. She clutched her bag tightly, terrified that at any moment he would demand to know what she was hiding. But no such demand came. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Sarah let out a shaky breath. She had no idea what she had stumbled upon, but one thing was clear: Project Lazarus was more than just some old corporate file. It was a secret, one that Richard Goldcrest seemed desperate to uncover. And now, that secret was in her possession. The rest of the day passed in a blur for Sarah. She went through the motions of her job, taking notes during the board meeting and fielding calls, but her mind was elsewhere. The weight of the lockbox in her bag seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the Goldcrest Industries lobby, Sarah finally packed up her things to leave. She had just pressed the button for the elevator when a hand clamped down on her shoulder. "Not so fast, Thompson." Sarah's blood ran cold as she turned to face Richard Goldcrest. His eyes were hard, his mouth set in a grim line. "Sir," she managed to squeak out. "My office. Now." Sarah's heart pounded as she followed Richard back to his opulent corner office. He closed the door behind them with an ominous click. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to one of the leather chairs in front of his desk. Sarah sank into the chair, her legs feeling like jelly. Had he discovered what she had taken? Was this the end of her career, or worse? Richard loomed over her, his expression unreadable. "Thompson, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Good," Richard continued. "Now, tell me, what do you know about Project Lazarus?" Sarah's mind raced. Should she tell him about the lockbox? About the hidden room? But something held her back, a nagging feeling that the truth behind Project Lazarus was something far more significant than she had initially believed. I don't know anything, sir," she stammered. "Like I said, I couldn't find any records of it in the archives." Richard studied her face intently, as if trying to peer into her very soul. After what felt like an eternity, he straightened up. "Very well," he said, his tone clipped. "You may go." "But Thompson?" Sarah paused at the door, her hand on the knob. "If I find out you're lying to me," Richard said softly, "there won't be a hole deep enough for you to hide in. Are we clear?" Sarah nodded, her throat dry. "Crystal clear, Mr. Goldcrest." As she hurried out of the office and into the cool night air, Sarah's mind was in turmoil. She had just lied to her boss, a man known for his ruthlessness in business and his intolerance for disloyalty. But more than that, she had stumbled upon a mystery that seemed to strike fear into the heart of one of the most powerful men in New York. What was Project Lazarus? And why was Richard Goldcrest so desperate to find it? As Sarah hailed a cab, clutching her bag with its secret cargo close to her chest, she knew one thing for certain: her life would never be the same again. Sarah's tiny apartment felt different when she returned that night, smaller, more confining. She locked the door behind her, drew the curtains, and only then did she dare to pull the lockbox from her bag. In the harsh light of her kitchenette, the box looked even more mysterious. The words Project Lazarus seemed to glow faintly, as if imbued with some secret power. Sarah ran her fingers over the cool metal, her heart racing. "What are you?" she whispered. "And why does Richard Goldcrest want you so badly?" A soft meow interrupted her thoughts. Sarah looked down to see her cat, Midnight, rubbing against her legs. "Oh, Midnight," she sighed, scooping up the black cat. "What have I gotten myself into?" As if in answer, Midnight purred and butted his head against the lockbox. The movement caused something to shift inside, producing a faint rattling sound. Sarah's eyes widened. There was definitely something inside, something small and loose. But what? Sarah examined the lock more closely, and suddenly, the memory that had teased her in the archives came flooding back. The key she had found in her father's garden, could it possibly be connected to this? With trembling hands, she retrieved the small box where she kept her father's key. As she held it up to the lockbox, her breath caught in her throat. The intricate design of the key matched the lock perfectly. "It can't be," she whispered, her mind reeling. How could her father, a humble gardener who had never set foot in Goldcrest Industries, have a key to something Richard Goldcrest was so desperate to find? Taking a deep breath, Sarah inserted the key into the lock. It slid in smoothly, as if it had been waiting all these years for this moment. With a soft click, the box opened. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a single USB drive and a yellowed envelope. Sarah's hands shook as she picked up the envelope. On the front, in faded ink, was a single name, Sarah. Her own name, written in a hand she didn't recognize. With her heart pounding, Sarah opened the envelope and began to read. My dearest Sarah. Asterisk, if you're reading this, then the time has come for you to know the truth. A truth that I, your father, have kept hidden for far too long, asterisk. Asterisk, I was not always the man you knew. Before I was David Thompson, loving husband and father, I was Daniel Thorne, co-founder of Goldcrest Industries, asterisk. Sarah gasped, nearly dropping the letter. Her father, the co-founder of Goldcrest Industries? It seemed impossible, and yet. Asterisk, Richard Goldcrest Sr. and I built this company from the ground up. We were more than business partners, we were brothers in all but blood. But our vision for the company differed. While Richard saw Goldcrest as a means to accumulate wealth and power, I dreamed of using our resources to make the world a better place, asterisk. Asterisk, Project Lazarus was to be my legacy, a revolutionary medical technology that could save countless lives. But Richard saw it differently. He wanted to weaponize it, to sell it to the highest bidder without regard for the consequences, asterisk. Asterisk, we argued, and in the heat of the moment, I threatened to expose his plans. The next day, there was an accident at the lab. I barely escaped with my life and the core research for Project Lazarus, asterisk. Asterisk, I knew then that I had to disappear. To protect you, your mother, and the secret of Project Lazarus. I assumed a new identity, became David Thompson, and vowed to live a simple life far from the world of corporate greed, asterisk. Asterisk, but I always knew this day might come. The day when the truth would need to be revealed, asterisk. Asterisk, the USB drive contains all the research and proof of what really happened. Use it wisely, my daughter. The fate of Goldcrest Industries, and perhaps much more, now rests in your hands, asterisk. Asterisk, I'm sorry for the burden I've placed on you. Know that I love you, and I've always been proud of the woman you've become, asterisk. Asterisk, your loving father. Daniel Thorne, asterisk. Sarah sat back, her mind spinning. The father she thought she knew, the quiet, unassuming gardener, had been living a double life all along. She was the daughter of Daniel Thorne, rightful co-founder of Goldcrest Industries. As the magnitude of this revelation washed over her, a mixture of emotions flooded through Sarah. Anger at the lies, confusion about her true identity, and a deep sadness for the weight her father had carried all these years. But beneath it all, a spark of determination began to grow. Her father had entrusted her with this secret for a reason. Now, it was up to her to decide what to do with it. Sarah's gaze fell on the USB drive. Whatever was on it, she knew it had the power to change everything. But as she reached for it, a sharp knock at her apartment door made her jump. Sarah? Are you in there? It's Mia! Open up, chica! Sarah quickly shoved the letter and USB drive back into the lockbox, hiding it under a couch cushion before answering the door. Mia burst in, her usual energy somewhat subdued. Sarah, you won't believe what I just heard. There's a rumor going around that Richard Goldcrest is planning massive layoffs. People are saying half the company might be let go. Sarah's mind raced. Could this be connected to Project Lazarus? Was Richard trying to cover his tracks? That's terrible, Sarah managed to say, trying to keep her voice steady. Mia studied her friend's face. Sarah, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. For a moment, Sarah was tempted to tell Mia everything. But the weight of her father's secret held her back. It's nothing, she lied. I'm just worried about the job situation, that's all. Mia didn't look convinced, but she didn't press the issue. Well, listen. Whatever happens, we're in this together, okay? You're not alone. As Mia hugged her, Sarah felt a pang of guilt. She was alone in this, more than Mia could possibly know. After Mia left, Sarah retrieved the lockbox and stared at the USB drive. She knew she should look at its contents, but fear held her back. Once she viewed what was on that drive, there would be no going back. Instead, she found herself reaching for her phone. Before she could second-guess herself, she dialed a number she knew by heart. "Hello?" Emily's voice, weak but warm, came through the speaker. Sarah said, fighting back tears. "How are you feeling?" "Oh, you know me," Emily chuckled softly. "Too stubborn to let a little thing like cancer keep me down. How about you, big sis? You sound different." Sarah took a deep breath. I need to tell you something. It's about Dad." Over the next hour, Sarah poured out everything: the key, the lockbox, the letter. Emily listened in stunned silence. "Sarah," Emily finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's incredible. But what are you going to do?" It was the question Sarah had been avoiding. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to march into Richard Goldcrest's office and confront him with all of this. But you're scared," Emily finished for her. "Terrified," Sarah corrected. "This isn't just about me, Em. If what Dad wrote is true, then Richard Goldcrest Sr. tried to kill him. Who knows what his son might do to protect the family legacy?" Emily was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, do you remember what Dad always used to tell us?" Sarah smiled despite herself. "The truth fears no question." "Exactly," Emily said. "Whatever's on that USB drive, whatever the truth is, it's time for it to come out. And you're the only one who can do it." As Sarah ended the call, she felt a newfound resolve. Emily was right. It was time for the truth to come out, whatever the consequences might be. With steady hands, she plugged the USB drive into her laptop. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Goldcrest Industries earlier than usual. The weight of the USB drive in her pocket felt like a ticking time bomb. As she stepped out of the elevator onto the executive floor, she nearly collided with Harold, the elderly janitor. "Whoa there, Miss Sarah," Harold said, steadying her. "You're here mighty early. Everything all right?" Sarah managed a weak smile. "Just a busy day ahead, Harold. How are you?" Harold's kind eyes studied her face. "I'm just fine, Miss Sarah. But you look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." For a moment, Sarah was tempted to confide in Harold. There was something about his gentle demeanor that made her want to trust him. But she held back. "It's nothing, really," she lied. "Just work stress." Harold nodded, but Sarah could tell he wasn't convinced. "Well, Miss Sarah, remember what I always say. The truth fears no question," Sarah finished, startled. "How did you?" But Harold just winked and continued on his way, pushing his cleaning cart down the hall. Sarah shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. She had more pressing matters to deal with. As she approached Richard Goldcrest's office, she could hear raised voices coming from inside. She recognized Richard's angry tones, but the other voice was unfamiliar, older, with a hint of a British accent. "You can't do this, Richard," the older man was saying. "Your father would never have approved." "My father is dead," Richard snarled. "And I'm in charge now. The deal goes through, with or without your approval, Uncle Victor." Sarah's eyes widened. Uncle Victor? She had never heard Richard mention any family besides his late father. The door suddenly swung open, and a distinguished-looking older man stormed out. He barely glanced at Sarah as he strode past, muttering under his breath. "Thompson!" Richard's voice cracked like a whip. "Get in here. Now." Sarah took a deep breath and stepped into the lion's den. Richard was pacing behind his desk, his face flushed with anger. "I need you to set up an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. No excuses, no delays. Everyone needs to be there." "Of course, Mr. Goldcrest," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "May I ask what this is about?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "You may not. Just do your job, Thompson. For once." As Sarah turned to leave, Richard called out, "And Thompson? I want you in that meeting. Taking notes." Sarah nodded, her heart racing. This was it, her chance to confront Richard with what she had discovered. But as she looked into his cold, calculating eyes, she realized that a direct confrontation might be too dangerous. She needed a plan. The hours leading up to the board meeting were a blur of activity. Sarah's mind raced as she made calls, sent emails, and prepared the conference room. All the while, the USB drive in her pocket seemed to burn with the weight of its secrets. As board members began to file into the room, Sarah noticed an undercurrent of tension. Whispered conversations ceased abruptly when Richard entered, his face set in grim determination. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began once everyone was seated, "I've called this emergency meeting to discuss the future of Goldcrest Industries. As you know, we've been facing increased competition and market pressures. It's time for bold action." Sarah's pen hovered over her notepad, her heart pounding. "I've negotiated a deal to sell our medical research division to Blackstone Pharmaceuticals," Richard continued. "This will allow us to focus on our core business and maximize shareholder value." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Sarah's mind flashed to her father's letter. Was this Richard's attempt to bury Project Lazarus once and for all? "But sir," one of the board members spoke up, "our medical research division is on the verge of several breakthroughs. Selling now could be premature." Richard's eyes flashed dangerously. "The decision has been made. Unless anyone has any objections they'd like to raise?" The room fell silent. Sarah could feel the weight of the USB drive in her pocket, the truth it contained begging to be revealed. But fear held her back. What if she was wrong? What if she lost everything, her job, her ability to help Emily, over a misunderstanding? As Richard continued outlining the details of the sale, Sarah's internal struggle reached a fever pitch. The voice of her father echoed in her mind, "The truth fears no question." Before she could second-guess herself, Sarah stood up. "Mr. Goldcrest," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I have something I think the board needs to see." All eyes turned to her. Richard's face darkened with fury. "Thompson, sit down. You have no place speaking in this meeting." But Sarah stood her ground. "I'm sorry, sir, but I do. Because I'm not just Sarah Thompson, your assistant. I'm Sarah Thorne, daughter of Daniel Thorne, the true co-founder of Goldcrest Industries." A collective gasp went through the room. Richard's face drained of color. "What did you say?" he whispered. With trembling hands, Sarah pulled out the USB drive. "I have proof. Of everything. Project Lazarus, the real reason Daniel Thorne disappeared, and the truth about Goldcrest Industries' founding." For a moment, the room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then, chaos erupted. Board members began shouting questions, Richard lunged for the USB drive, and in the confusion, Sarah felt a hand grasp her arm. "This way," quickly, a voice whispered. Sarah turned to see Harold, the janitor, pulling her towards a side door. "How did you?" Sarah began, but Harold cut her off. "There's no time to explain. We need to get you out of here." As they hurried down a back stairwell, Sarah's mind reeled. How did Harold know about any of this? And where was he taking her? They emerged into the underground parking garage, where a sleek black car was waiting. The back door opened, and Sarah gasped as she recognized the man inside, Victor Goldcrest, Richard's uncle. "Get in, Miss Thorne," Victor said urgently. "We have much to discuss, and very little time." As the car sped away from Goldcrest Industries, Sarah clutched the USB drive to her chest. She had just upended her entire life, revealed a decades-old secret, and was now fleeing with two men she barely knew. What had she gotten herself into? And more importantly, where would this path lead? The car wound its way through the busy streets of New York, the skyscrapers giving way to brownstones as they headed into a quieter part of the city. Sarah sat in stunned silence, her mind still reeling from the events of the past hour. Finally, Victor Goldcrest cleared his throat. "I imagine you have questions, Miss Thorne." Sarah let out a strangled laugh. "Questions? I don't even know where to begin. How do you know who I am? How is Harold involved in all this? And why are you helping me?" Victor exchanged a glance with Harold, who was driving the car. "Perhaps it's best if we start at the beginning. Harold, if you would." Harold nodded, catching Sarah's eye in the rearview mirror. "Miss Sarah, I wasn't always a janitor. In fact, many years ago, I worked as a security specialist for Goldcrest Industries. Your father, Daniel Thorne, hired me personally." Sarah's eyes widened. "You knew my father?" "I did," Harold said softly. "He was a good man. When he disappeared, I knew something wasn't right. I've spent the last 2 decades working undercover at Goldcrest, trying to uncover the truth. And I," Victor added, "have been doing what I could from the inside to keep Richard's worst impulses in check. But I'm afraid I've reached the limit of my influence." Sarah's head was spinning. But why? Why go to all this trouble? Victor's eyes grew sad. "Because Daniel Thorne was more than just my brother's business partner. He was my friend. And what happened to him was a grave injustice, one that I've spent years trying to make right." "What exactly did happen?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor took a deep breath. "I think it's best if you see for yourself. What's on that drive, Miss Thorne?" Sarah pulled out the USB drive, turning it over in her hands. I don't know. I haven't looked at it yet." "Then perhaps now is the time," Victor said gently. The car pulled up to a nondescript apartment building. Inside, Victor led them to a small but well-appointed office. As Sarah plugged the USB drive into a computer, she felt as if she was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to take a leap into the unknown. The screen flickered to life, revealing a series of folders. Sarah clicked on one labeled Project Lazarus. What she saw took her breath away. Schematics for a device that could regenerate human tissue. Clinical trial data showing unprecedented success in treating previously incurable conditions. And a video file, dated the day before her father's disappearance. With trembling hands, Sarah clicked play. Her father's face filled the screen. He looked younger, but his eyes held the same kindness she remembered. "If you're watching this," Daniel Thorne's voice came through the speakers, filled with a mixture of determination and regret, "then the truth has finally come to light. I only hope it's not too late." Sarah leaned forward, drinking in every word from the father she thought she knew. "Project Lazarus was meant to be a beacon of hope," Daniel continued. a way to regenerate damaged tissue, to cure diseases we thought incurable. But Richard saw it differently. The image changed, showing security footage of Richard Goldcrest Sr. in a heated argument with Daniel. "Think of the military applications, Daniel." Richard's voice boomed. "We could create super soldiers, heal them from any injury. The government would pay billions." "That's not what this is for," Daniel shouted back. "We're talking about saving lives, not weaponizing them." The footage cut back to Daniel's face, now grim. "I knew then that I had to protect Project Lazarus at all costs. Even if it meant leaving behind everything and everyone I loved." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she watched her father detail his plan to disappear, to become David Thompson and live a life in hiding. "But I always hoped," Daniel said, his eyes seeming to look directly at Sarah, "that someday, someone would find this. Someone who could set things right." The video ended, leaving the room in stunned silence. Victor was the first to speak. "I had my suspicions, but I never knew the full extent of it. Richard, my brother, he really did try to kill my father," Sarah finished, her voice hard. "And now his son is about to sell off the entire medical division. Probably to bury any trace of Project Lazarus for good." Harold leaned forward, his weathered face etched with concern. "Miss Sarah, what you've uncovered here, it's dynamite. But it's also dangerous. Richard Goldcrest Jr. won't take this lying down." "He's right," Victor added. "My nephew has always been ruthless, but if he feels cornered, there's no telling what he might do." Sarah stood up, pacing the small office. Her mind was racing, trying to process everything she'd learned. Her father's secret life, the true nature of Project Lazarus, the decades-long cover-up, it was almost too much to bear. But as she turned to face Victor and Harold, she felt a steely resolve settling over her. "I don't care how dangerous it is," she said. "My father sacrificed everything to protect this research. I won't let it be buried or weaponized. We have to stop Richard." Victor nodded slowly. "I agree. But we'll need to be smart about this. Richard has resources, connections. We can't just go public without proof." "But we have proof," Sarah protested, gesturing to the computer. "We have your father's word," Harold said gently. "But after all these years, we need more. We need to find the actual Project Lazarus research." Sarah's eyes widened as a memory surfaced. "The hidden room in the archives," she breathed. "There was a computer there, old but still running. What if?" "It's worth a shot," Victor said, standing up. "But we'll need to move fast. Once Richard realizes what's happened, he'll lock everything down." As they prepared to leave, Sarah's phone buzzed. Her heart sank as she saw Mia's name on the screen. "Sarah, where are you?" Mia's voice was frantic. "The whole company's in chaos. Richard Goldcrest is on a rampage, security's searching everywhere." "What's going on?" Sarah closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "Mia, I can't explain everything right now. But I need you to trust me. Can you do something for me?" "Anything," Mia said without hesitation. "I need you to go to my apartment. In the back of my closet, there's a small safe. The combination is Emily's birthday. Inside, you'll find some documents. I need you to take them and go to Emily. Stay with her, keep her safe. Can you do that?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sarah, you're scaring me. Are you in trouble?" "I'm okay," Sarah assured her friend. "But things are complicated. Please, Mia." "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." Okay, Mia finally said. But you better explain everything when this is over. And Sarah? Be careful. As Sarah ended the call, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up to see Harold's kind eyes. You've got good friends, Miss Sarah, he said softly. Don't forget that. No matter what happens, you're not alone in this. Sarah nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. Thank you, Harold. For everything. Victor cleared his throat. If we're going back to Goldcrest Industries, we'll need a plan. And some help. I might know someone, Harold said, a twinkle in his eye. An old friend from my security days. She's retired now, but I bet she'd love one last adventure. As they left the apartment, Sarah felt a mix of fear and excitement coursing through her veins. She was about to go up against one of the most powerful men in New York, armed with nothing but the truth and a handful of unlikely allies. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The streets of New York were a blur as Harold navigated the car through the evening traffic. Sarah sat in the back with Victor, going over their plan one more time. Remember, Victor said, our priority is to get to that hidden room and secure the Project Lazarus data. Once we have that, we can expose Richard's plans and clear your father's name. Sarah nodded, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. And what about Richard? What if he's there? Victor's face darkened. Leave Richard to me. It's time I had a long overdue conversation with my nephew. The car pulled up a block away from Goldcrest Industries. A woman was waiting for them, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, her posture military straight despite her age. Sarah, this is Margaret, Harold said as they got out of the car. Best security expert I've ever known, and a dear friend. Margaret's sharp eyes assessed Sarah. So, you're Daniel's girl. He'd be proud of you, you know. Taking on the big bad wolf like this. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. I hope so, she managed to say. Margaret's expression softened slightly. He would be. Now, let's go kick some corporate butt, shall we? As they approached Goldcrest Industries, Sarah was struck by how different the building looked at night. The gleaming tower that had once represented power and success now seemed ominous, its dark windows hiding who knew what secrets. Margaret led them to a side entrance, her fingers flying over the keypad. Harold's been keeping me updated on the security systems, she explained as the door clicked open. Some things never change, even after retirement. They slipped inside, the corridors eerily quiet. Sarah's heart was pounding so loud she was sure someone would hear it. As they neared the elevator, voices echoed from around the corner. Margaret held up a hand, signaling them to stop. Don't care what it takes, Richard's voice drifted towards them. Find Thompson and bring her to me. And sweep every inch of this building. If there's anything left of Project Lazarus, I want it destroyed. Understood? Yes, sir, a gruff voice replied. Sarah held her breath as footsteps approached. Margaret pulled them into a nearby supply closet, closing the door just as two security guards walked past. That was too close, Victor whispered once the coast was clear. It's about to get closer, Margaret said grimly. We need to split up. Victor, you and I will create a distraction. Harold, you take Sarah to the archives. Find what you need and get out. We'll meet at the rendezvous point in 1 hour. Sarah wanted to protest, to say they should stick together, but she knew Margaret was right. They were running out of time. As Victor and Margaret headed towards the executive offices, Harold led Sarah to a service elevator. This will take us straight to the basement, he explained. Less chance of running into trouble. As the elevator descended, Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever happened next, she knew she was doing the right thing. She was fulfilling her father's legacy. The archives were just as Sarah remembered, rows upon rows of filing cabinets stretching into the gloom. Harold kept watch as Sarah made her way to the hidden room, her fingers searching for the concealed lever. With a soft click, the wall panel swung open. Sarah rushed to the old computer, her hands shaking as she booted it up. Come on, she muttered as the machine whirred to life. Files began to populate the screen, schematics, research notes, clinical trials. It was all there, the full scope of Project Lazarus laid bare. We did it, Sarah breathed, quickly copying the files onto a flash drive. Suddenly, the lights flickered. An alarm began to blare. Sarah! Harold called from the doorway. We need to go. Now. Sarah grabbed the flash drive and ran, her heart pounding. As they raced through the archives, she could hear shouting and footsteps approaching. They burst out of the archives, only to find their path blocked by two burly security guards. Stop right there, one of them shouted. Sarah felt a moment of panic, but then Harold stepped forward, his usually kind face set in determination. Sorry, boys, he said, but we don't have time for this. What happened next was almost too fast for Sarah to follow. Harold moved with a speed and precision that belied his age, his hands a blur as he disarmed and incapacitated both guards in a matter of seconds. Sarah stared at him in shock. Harold, how did you? No time to explain, he said, grabbing her arm. We need to get to the rendezvous point. As they raced through the building, alarms blaring all around them, Sarah couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. They had the evidence. They could expose Richard's plans. They could clear her father's name. But as they rounded a corner, Sarah's hope turned to icy fear. There, blocking their path, stood Richard Goldcrest Jr., his face contorted with rage. Well, he sneered. If it isn't the little mouse who thought she could roar. Did you really think you could outsmart me, Thompson? Or should I say, Thorne? Sarah stood her ground, lifting her chin defiantly. It's over, Richard. We have everything, Project Lazarus, the truth about my father, your plans to sell it off. It's done. Richard's laugh was cold and humorless. Oh, you naive little girl. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Your father was weak, and so are you. I built this company into what it is today, and I'll be damned if I let some secretary with delusions of grandeur take it all away. He took a step forward, his eyes glinting dangerously. Now, hand over that drive, and maybe, just maybe, I'll let you walk out of here alive. Sarah felt Harold tense beside her, ready to spring into action. But before either of them could move, a new voice rang out. That's enough, Richard. Victor Goldcrest stepped into view, his face a mask of disappointment and resolve. Richard's eyes widened in surprise. Uncle Victor? What are you doing here? Cleaning up a mess that should have been dealt with long ago, Victor said, his voice heavy with regret. I've stood by for too long, watching you destroy everything your father and Daniel built. No more. Richard's face twisted with fury. You're siding with her? With them? Against your own family? Family? Victor scoffed. You stopped being family the moment you chose greed over integrity. Daniel Thorne was more of a brother to me than your father ever was. And Sarah. Sarah is the daughter he would have been proud of. For a moment, Richard seemed at a loss for words. Then, with a roar of rage, he lunged at Sarah. But he never reached her. In a move that seemed impossible for a man his age, Victor intercepted his nephew, pinning him against the wall. It's over, Richard, Victor said softly. Let it go. As if on cue, the elevator doors opened, revealing Margaret and a team of FBI agents. Richard Goldcrest Jr., one of the agents, announced, "You're under arrest for corporate espionage, attempted murder, and a whole laundry list of other charges we'll be happy to go over with you downtown." As the agents led a shell-shocked Richard away, Sarah felt her knees go weak. Harold caught her arm, steadying her. "You did it, Miss Sarah," he said, his eyes shining with pride. "You did it." Sarah looked around at the unlikely team that had come together to help her: Harold, the undercover protector, Margaret, the retired security expert, and Victor, the uncle who had chosen truth over family ties. And as the adrenaline began to fade, Sarah realized that this wasn't just about clearing her father's name or exposing corporate corruption. It was about family, the one you're born with, and the one you choose. Epilogue: 1 year later. The sun streamed through the windows of Thorne Medical Research Center, casting a warm glow over the bustling laboratory. Sarah stood at the heart of it all, watching as scientists and researchers worked tirelessly on the next breakthrough. Project Lazarus had been declassified, its potential for healing now available to the world. The regenerative technology was already saving lives, with clinical trials showing promise in treating everything from spinal cord injuries to degenerative diseases. A soft knock at the door pulled Sarah from her thoughts. She turned to see Emily, her sister's face glowing with health. "Ready for the board meeting?" Emily asked, a teasing lilt in her voice. Sarah laughed. "As ready as I'll ever be. Who would have thought we'd end up here?" As they walked to the conference room, Sarah marveled at how much had changed in a year. Goldcrest Industries had been restructured, with Victor at the helm during the transition. Sarah and Emily, as Daniel Thorne's heirs, had used their newfound resources to establish the research center, fulfilling their father's dream of using technology to help people. The conference room was already full when they arrived. Mia, now head of PR, gave Sarah a thumbs up. Harold and Margaret, who had both come out of retirement to act as security consultants, sat side by side, bickering good-naturedly. And there, at the head of the table, was a face Sarah had only known from old photographs and a video confession. Daniel Thorne, alive and well, smiled at his daughters. The truth had come out in the months following Richard's arrest. Daniel, fearing for his family's safety, had faked his own death and assumed a new identity. But with the danger past, he had finally been able to come home. As Sarah took her seat beside her father, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The path that had led her here had been fraught with danger and deception, but it had also been lined with unexpected allies and newfound strength. She thought of Richard, now serving time for his crimes, and felt a mixture of pity and resolve. His fall from grace was a reminder of the corrupting influence of greed and the importance of staying true to one's principles. As the meeting began, Sarah looked around the table at the faces of her chosen family, the sister who had never lost faith in her, the friends who had stood by her side, and the father she had thought lost forever. In that moment, Sarah realized that the greatest secret, the one that had been hidden in plain sight all along, was the power of humility, integrity, and love. It was these qualities, not wealth or status, that truly made a person rich. And as she began to outline their plans for the future, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, healing, and the unbreakable bonds of family.